At 8:29 a.m. on November 23, 1996, Ethiopian Airlines Flight 961 was cruising at 39,000 feet over eastern Africa. The Boeing 767 had departed Addis Ababa less than half an hour earlier. On board were 163 passengers and 12 crew members. Everything seemed routine. The captain, Lewol Abate, a 42-year-old veteran with over 11,500 flight hours, and his first officer, Jonas Makuria, with 6,500 hours, were in control. The aircraft had reached its cruising altitude smoothly, and the skies were clear. The mood on board was calm, but just 20 minutes into the flight, at 8:29 a.m., chaos erupted. 3 Ethiopian men leapt from their seats. Identified later as Alamayehu Balayina, Matthias Balay, and Sultan Hussein, 2 unemployed high school graduates and a nurse, they rushed down the aisle, shoving past flight attendants. One of the flight attendants, Hiwat Tades, stationed near the forward galley, thought at first the men were fighting among themselves. Then she saw the third man join them, and her heart sank. This was no brawl. This was a hijack. The men stormed the cockpit, smashing open the unsecured door. They grabbed a fire axe and a fire extinguisher from the cockpit stowage. One of them, the leader, held what he claimed was a bomb. Over the intercom, in Amharic, French, and English, they barked their demands.
"We've escaped from prison. We're against the government. If anyone interferes, we'll blow up the plane."
They claimed there were 11 of them, a lie to intimidate the passengers and crew. In reality, there were only 3. Captain Lewol Abate, alone in the cockpit with the hijackers, faced an impossible situation. The men demanded he fly to Australia, where they sought political asylum. Lewol, a seasoned pilot who had survived 2 previous hijackings in 1992 and 1995, stayed calm. He explained the cold, hard truth. The Boeing 767 didn't have enough fuel to reach Australia. For the 2-hour flight to Nairobi, the plane carried about 3.5 hours of fuel, enough for the destination, a diversion to an alternate airport like Mombasa, and a 30-minute reserve. The hijackers didn't believe him. One of them waved a copy of Ethiopian Airlines in-flight magazine, pointing to a spec sheet claiming the 767 could fly for 11 hours. Lewol tried to clarify that figure was for a fully fueled plane under ideal conditions, not their situation. He showed them the fuel gauges, the needles creeping toward empty. But the hijackers, described later as young, inexperienced, and psychologically fragile, refused to listen. They were erratic, volatile, and armed with makeshift weapons. The situation was spiraling. In the cabin, the atmosphere was tense but quiet. Passengers whispered among themselves, some praying, others frozen in fear. The hijackers patrolled the aisles, one clutching the fake bomb, another brandishing the axe. Meanwhile, Lewol flew south along the African coast, hoping to stay near airports for an emergency landing. He suggested stopping in Mombasa to refuel, but the hijackers refused, insisting on Australia. They ordered him to steer east, toward the open ocean. Lewol, knowing the fuel situation was dire, secretly aimed for the Comoros Islands, a small archipelago between mainland Africa and Madagascar, about 1,000 miles from Addis Ababa. In the passenger cabin, reality began to set in. A retired pilot wrote a note to his family in case he didn't survive. Nearby, other passengers clenched hands, whispered prayers, and tried to stay calm. Flight attendants moved quietly through the aisles, offering reassurance when they could. Still, the hijackers paraded through the aisles, oblivious to the growing crisis. At 11:41 a.m., the right engine flamed out, starved of fuel. The lead hijacker stepped into the cabin to confer with his accomplices, giving Lewol a chance to act. He grabbed the intercom and announced to the passengers, "Prepare for a crash landing. Do not inflate your life jackets inside the aircraft." He knew that inflating life jackets prematurely could trap people inside a flooding cabin. The hijackers, now frantic, returned and began interfering with the controls. Mohammed Amin, standing near the cockpit door, tried to negotiate with the hijackers, possibly urging them to surrender. His bravery would cost him his life. With the left engine sputtering and no airport in sight, Lewol had one option left: ditch the plane in the shallow waters near Lagalawa Beach, about 500 yards off Grande Comore. He tried to align the aircraft parallel to the waves to minimize impact, but the hijackers kept grabbing at the controls. At 12:20 p.m., the left wingtip and engine struck a coral reef, causing the plane to tilt violently. The Boeing 767 slammed into the ocean at 200 miles per hour, breaking apart on impact. The fuselage shattered, with only the tail remaining above water. Divers, hotel staff, and vacationing doctors rushed to help, pulling survivors from the wreckage. Boats raced from the beach toward floating passengers. Some survivors clung to seat cushions, others were found unconscious in the waves. Of the 175 people on board, 125 perished, including all 3 hijackers. Many passengers survived the initial impact, but drowned, trapped by inflated life jackets that pinned them to the ceiling as water flooded the cabin. An estimated 60 to 80 passengers died this way. 6 of the 9 cabin crew members lost their lives, some swayed by the passengers' panic and inflating their own life jackets. The aftermath was grim. Recovery teams worked for days to locate and identify the victims. With limited local resources, the Comorian authorities relied heavily on assistance from French and Ethiopian teams. Survivors were transported to nearby hospitals, and some were airlifted for specialized care. Families of the victims arrived from around the world, greeted by officials, rescue workers, and the haunting silence of what had been lost. The black boxes retrieved from the wreckage confirmed the pilots' heroic efforts. Their voices, calm even as the plane lost altitude, painted a picture of professionalism under pressure. The recording also captured the confusion and panic of the final moments, the hijackers screaming, the cockpit alarms blaring, the desperate struggle to keep the plane steady. Lowell, who had now survived 3 hijackings, never flew commercially again. But his actions saved lives. Flight 961 remains a chilling chapter in aviation history, a tragic testament to what happens when desperation, delusion, and denial collide at 39,000 feet. In the years that followed, the crash of Flight 961 became a defining case study in aviation safety. Airlines around the world reevaluated emergency water landing procedures, focusing on how flight crews are trained to handle ocean landings under extreme pressure. International aviation bodies reviewed hijacking response protocols, emphasizing the need for improved communication strategies, psychological screening, and in-flight threat assessment. Ethiopian Airlines upgraded its cockpit security measures, joining a broader global shift toward reinforced cockpit doors and stricter access control systems. The tragedy sparked renewed urgency across the aviation industry to close gaps in security, crew readiness, and passenger safety that the hijacking had exposed. Some of the survivors later gave interviews, recounting how they escaped, what they saw, and the faces they never forgot. For many, it was the most traumatic event of their lives, but a few said it also gave them a new appreciation for life. And for Captain Lul Abate and First Officer Jonas Makuria, their story became one of the most cited examples in pilot training around the world. A case study not just in flying skill, but in poise, communication, and human endurance. In the wake of Ethiopian Airlines Flight 961's harrowing ditching, the world witnessed both the tragic loss of life and the incredible resilience of the human spirit.